This afternoon, I'm in Provo, Utah, talking with Dennis S. Sears, who is the Senior Law Librarian for Foreign and International Law and professor at the Howard W. Hunter Law Library of Brigham Young University. Dennis joined the Law Library faculty in 1988, correct?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I want to thank you on camera for basically orchestrating the events here at the law school. I've had several of these conversations today, and you have been the person here who's helped get those all coordinated, and I very much appreciate that. So to give due recognition, if people don't like them, I guess maybe we're both in trouble, but I don't think so. I think they're all very good interviews. They make nice contributions to our oral history. Well, with all that said, let me, as is one of our customs, ask you about your life when you were, young and today.
Well, I was born and raised in Utah. My mother was born and raised in Park City, on a farm, and she came here to BYU. Studied education, became an elementary school teacher, and then left from here and went out to teach in Tooele, which is just on the other side of the Oquirrh Mountains from Salt Lake City. My father is actually from North Carolina, and after World War II, he was stationed out here for a little while, also in Tooele, and that's where they met and got married. So I was born in Salt Lake, but raised for the first couple of years in Tooele, and then my father left the service, and he went to become a civil servant for the military. For the military, and he worked for the Army initially, but then transferred and worked for the Air Force up at Air Force Base up north of Salt Lake, and so they ended up moving to Salt Lake at about 1953. And so after that point, I lived in Salt Lake. Went through...
So you're sort of a native of this area and have been here pretty much all the time?
Most of my life, yes. Grew up and went through elementary school, junior high school, all here in Salt Lake. I actually was pretty active in music in high school, and spent quite a bit of time at the University of Utah, actually, in various performances and seminars, things of that nature. But I came down here for a youth conference, and my mother, like I said, had graduated from here, but I had never really had any ties here other than that. I came down here and I really liked what I saw, and in fact I'd cut a few classes to visit a few lectures here on campus.
You've done things like that too. You and everybody else in college, I think, at some point or another.
But I really liked what I saw, and so upon graduation I ended up coming here. I was here for 1 year, my freshman year, and then I left and served as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I served for 2 years in Germany. Then I came back and finished off my undergraduate work. And a lot of things just started happening, and I started a graduate program at that time. And during my first year of graduate school, that's when I met my wife, who was an undergraduate here. And we, I met her in January. We were engaged in April and married in August.
Wow.
So
well, if that works, it works.
It worked.
Yeah.
It's worked. And finished off my classwork for my master's program. While I was here, it was during the Vietnam period, and I was actually enrolled in the ROTC program, so I had a 2-year commitment. I had taken an educational delay because of the drawdown after Vietnam. And that's when I started my master's program. I finished off my classwork and then went into the service. I had a 2-year obligation there. And then afterwards came back out, finished off my thesis, and then that's when I started law school.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much been here ever since. I've done a lot of work, different places, but we've lived here in Provo ever since that time.
Now, I know you have a number of degrees, 6, I believe, in total.
Excuse me?
I think you have 6 degrees in total, correct?
Well, I guess it depends.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you continued education after law school at all? Or?
Yes, I did. I went and pursued an MLS degree after law school, and then I also picked up a master's degree in strategic studies.
Mm-hmm.
So,
one of the advantages of being employed in private higher education often is tuition benefits.
yes, it is.
I know, especially when they're for your kids, which they usually are as well.
Mm-hmm.
Those are tremendous benefits. But the ones for faculty and staff to continue in their studies if they want to are also pretty highly desirable, I think.
They are.
Yeah. Well, sort of with that, you've mentioned your degrees, and you've mentioned at least one hobby, which is music. Do you have any other hobbies? Or do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that one? Tell us about some of that, hobbies or other pursuits.
Nowadays it's probably mostly gardening.
Uh-huh.
I find it therapeutic to get outside and work in the yard. Vegetables, fruits, and just flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Just enjoy after.
Do you grow vegetables or in the yard or anything?
Oh yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we have grow boxes. And we have a lot of different kinds of vegetables
Mm-hmm.
there. Everything from just your squashes, and winter and summer squashes, and your peppers and your tomatoes. And just a
I'll
lot.
bet you get spoiled with some of the fresh stuff. You go right out there and pick it and come on in and eat it.
It is. It's fresh.
I
Right off the
know
vine.
tomatoes especially are they're characteristic. If you get them fresh, they're really good. Corn used to be pretty much that way too, although I think they've re-engineered it somehow. And I know a lot of the corn I get without going to the fields directly to buy it is still pretty sweet these days.
Yes.
It didn't used to be the same. It was very different if you got it really fresh.
Mhm.
So you must enjoy some of those benefits as well. Did you ever play an instrument with music, or was it just enjoyed in music itself?
Well, I did. I ended up minoring in music here as an undergraduate, as an instrumental. But I had so many other commitments that mostly what I do now is I consider myself kind of one of the educated audience.
Mm.
I really do enjoy music, a wide range of music, but haven't really pursued the performance of it since that time.
Yeah. I noticed in your background that when you completed your law degree, you didn't start off in the law library right away, but you clerked for a judge up in Salt Lake City, I believe.
No, he was here in Provo.
Oh, here in Provo.
Mm-hmm.
4th Judicial District Court of Utah. I guess that's here. Well, I learn something every day. And then you spent a year as a hearing officer, and that was in Salt Lake, I
That was in
believe,
Salt Lake.
as
The
the
tax
County Tax
administration.
Administration, before coming back and joining the faculty of the law library here at the university. Could you tell us a little bit about that era in your life, and particularly how was it that you were attracted back or to become a law librarian?
Well, it was kind of by chance.
Uh-huh.
I had worked here while I was a student on the reference desk in the evenings and on Saturdays. And during the summers, there wasn't the internship programs that they have nowadays that are really really good for the students as far as placement goes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually offered also the opportunity to stay here during the summers and work on a legal research manual. The manual was an in-house manual that needed to be kind of reviewed each year, updated. You know, we had examples and exercises and quizzes that were all associated with that manual.
That was used in the first year curriculum, wasn't it, in the fall, for a while to teach students research?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the pleasure of revising that summer or two.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, you'll learn a lot of things when you do that, I imagine.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's what really gave me an appreciation of just how important legal research was.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had anticipated being a law librarian. And so I left after graduation, took the bar, worked for a little while with a small law firm, and then I had applied for some judicial clerkships and was selected by this particular judge. He was new to the bench. He'd been in practice for about 30 years, but left private practice to go onto the bench. And I ended up, he came onto the bench because the previous judge had gone onto the federal bench.
Oh.
And he took his law clerk with him to the federal bench. And so when Judge Park went on the bench, he selected me, and so I took that position. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it. He was a judge of general jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw everything across the board, from criminal law to torts to property to contract law and everything in between, and it was very educational. At the end of the clerkship, that's when I was starting to look around and starting to interview again. And I ran into this position as a hearing officer up in the tax administration up in Salt Lake. I had actually not only pursued my law degree, but I had heard about, prior to coming to law school, about what they call the JD MBA program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually here for 4 years. I picked up my law degree as well as my MBA because I was mostly interested in kind of the business side of law.
Mm-hmm.
And so working for the tax administration, what I dealt with mostly was commercial property tax appeals. And so with my business background, I could look at things like income statements, profit and loss statements and things like that, basically the evidence, and yet I had to turn around and try to make some kind of a short recommendation, usually a page and a half to 2 pages, written, some kind of recommendation as to the value of the property. And so they liked me because I could do the business side of it, work with the business documents, and yet from the legal side, look at the evidence and make a written recommendation back to the Board of Equalization, which was actually the county council for the county. It was during that time that I'd been there for about a year, I guess, and then, but it was kind of seasonal work too, and so I started looking for something a little bit more permanent.
Yeah.
I
I
really
think seasonal sounds like it would make me nervous as to whether it'd be temporary if
Yeah.
the budget times changed.
It does,
Yeah.
and
So you're looking for something perhaps a little more durable?
yes. And so I had been interviewing and sending out letters of recommendation, or requesting letters of recommendation, things like that. And I was approached about coming back here. I guess they liked the work that I had done when I had been working on the legal research manual and working reference in that. And one of the faculty members here was leaving, so they approached me about coming back. And I was a little bit hesitant because I had a lot of other, some other irons in the fire. But by that time, I think we had 6 children by that time. So
You needed something that was a little more durable job-wise.
Yes, I did.
That's true. I can understand that very quickly.
And so things just kind of evolved, and I ended up coming here.
Uh-huh.
And I was here for a while, probably about 3 years, I guess. There wasn't really any pressure to get an MLS, but they had an MLS program across the street. And then it was announced that they were going to close the program.
Oh, yes,
So I kind of
that's
saw
right,
the
they did
rate,
for a while.
the writing was on the wall. And so I went over and talked to them and was admitted. And for the next 2 years, basically took 2 classes a semester, worked full-time, and cracked out that MLS.
That must have been a fair amount of effort to do the day job and the studies at the same time.
It was. From the reference side, it wasn't really all that much new to me.
Uh-huh.
But in coordinating with a lot of other people in the library,
Yeah.
whether it was cataloging the serials or circulation, whatever, I learned a lot in there that was very, very practical for my day-to-day job. So, and I really enjoyed a lot of the professors. They were good.
That was good. It would make the experience, I'm sure, a lot easier to take if you like what you're studying and with whom you're studying.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Very good. So then you had already been here as a reference librarian at the law library. And today, of course, we know you as a foreign and international expert. Could you talk a little bit about how that evolution came about?
Well, there was always kind of a responsibility for foreign and international law, but it wasn't a real high priority, at least initially. I mean, when I came here, there were 2 classes that were taught in international law. One was a public international law class. I'm not even sure if it was offered every year, it was every 2 years. And the same thing with an international business transactions course. And that was it. There just wasn't a lot going on here with regards to foreign international law. That's evolved over time, and I think it probably has everywhere.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, we have such a internationalized business world now.
It is. And, nowadays we have a lot of professors they're either teaching it, or they're writing in that area, or they're involved in organizations that, what we call community service type organizations that are involved in foreign and international law. And so I was kind of asked to look at that after I had been here for a couple of years, probably because I got a bachelor's in German. After I came back, I was at my primary major was psychology as an undergraduate, but I didn't want to lose that in my German language ability. And so I basically took 1 language class a semester just to keep my language current. And I enjoyed it. And so because of that, and then I had gone on to, after my undergraduate years, I decided to move into pursue a master's degree in modern European history. And that, my focus was, again, mostly on Central Europe, Germany, but I did take a lot of European history classes there. And so I guess based on my education as well as my interests, I started taking on more and more of those kinds of responsibilities. Collection development, mostly with recommending books, helping some of the professors that had started to move into that area a little bit more and more over time. And till now, I've probably got maybe half or even more of the faculty here are involved in one way or another in foreign and international law. Like I said, whether it's researching, teaching, or just working with kind of foreign international entities on their own. So it's blossomed a lot over the past several years.
I remember when I was relatively new at American University in Washington, so we're looking a little over 40 years ago, or about 40 years ago, and budgets were a little tight one year, so I couldn't buy certain things. And I remember a colleague of mine on the faculty came along. Her area was taxation, and she discovered that I had not bought a particular service that she felt we really needed. And it was a matter of economics. I didn't disagree with her, but I remember her and she's no longer with us, so I can probably say this publicly. She blurted out that, why was I spending money on international law when there isn't such a thing?
Mm.
And boy, times they have changed, and perceptions have changed, that this is not only real, and foreign law always has been real, but it permeates so much of what lawyers must have to do, at least the ones with business-oriented types of practices.
Yes.
Since there's so much, we're offshoring everything, and somebody has to look out for that legally. And that's part of what we all in the field are all about, I guess, with some of this new interest. So it's really, really quite fascinating. And I realize that's only one narrow part of international and foreign law interests. And there are lots of broader parts of interest as well.
Yeah, it's a very challenging area.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of collection building, Brigham Young has a reputation for putting a fair amount of resources into developing the law school and the library over the years. And I assume that helped you in being able to acquire materials from around the world. Or did you basically do that kind of thing?
It depends. We focused first and foremost on the curriculum. What is being taught here,
Mm-hmm.
and so depending on what the professor is teaching and what the requirements are for that course, especially if it's a paper course, we focused funds in those areas,
Mm-hmm.
and also then what the professors themselves are researching and writing on. And like I said, we've had a lot of professors that have kind of expanded in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I have one professor who has never really taught anything to do with foreign and international law, and yet she writes quite regularly in comparative law,
Wow.
looking at
Mm-hmm.
different legal systems. And I've helped her, locate materials that she's wanted to, that she's needed for her research and writing her papers. And so that's usually been our focus. We need to have a good basic collection, but then beyond that, that's what we're focusing on, the curriculum and actually what the professors themselves are researching in.
I noticed in doing some background to prepare for today that you have actually taught a number of courses in your own right in the law school. You want to talk a little bit about that sort of hat that you wear, among others?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed teaching.
Uh-huh.
It's and I guess that comes a bit out of my practice background.
Uh-huh.
Having worked for a judge for basically about a year and a half, what happened is that I picked up the remainder of the previous law clerk's year, and then I picked up my own year. So I was with him for about a year and a half, and just seeing what the judge required and what he expected of the attorneys that were appearing before him, it was a great mentoring experience for me.
Mm.
But it's also opened my eyes to really what the practice of law is really like, and what we need to do as far as preparing our students for that, the real world, as they would say. And so that's always been a very high priority with me because of that experience. And I've worked in like I said, a couple of small law firms doing project work for them. And again, trying to meet the needs of the attorneys and trying to prepare the students, because really, first year students have no idea what they're getting into. And then they come back, they come back wide-eyed after that first summer experience, and then they're pretty eager to learn about,
I remember those years. Oh, yes.
Exactly. And so that's why I've always felt it was important, and I guess my whole focus was preparing the students so they could go out and survive, and do so well, and kind of hit the ground running. And because I think it seems like more and more that's what they're expected to do.
Well, I think so. From what I'm hearing, the idea of you graduate, if you're high enough in your class, you go to a fairly large firm, and they basically teach you the nuts and bolts of practice. That is no longer the norm for even students who have always had an entree to those sorts of jobs. They're just not there. And even those that are, the expectation is that, you know, we want you to produce yourself quickly, and we don't want to have to spend a lot of our time doing what we think the law school should have done all
Yes,
along.
exactly.
So there's a lot of pressure on law schools today to be a little more focused on the real world. And of course, many of our classroom colleagues who teach, they're still living as they have before. So that transition is still, I suspect, somewhat underway. And may not be as underway as much as some people think it should, but it sounds like you're out of ahead of the game here with what you've been doing.
We've had a pretty aggressive advocacy program, kind of team teaching with legal writing professors, and so that we kind of have taught the legal research side in support of the legal writing side, and preparing the students that way, so that they can get through, you know, drafting a couple of briefs during the course of the fall semester, and then prepare for the moot court in the winter semester. So, and I think that's been a very successful program.
Does the school have any kind of advanced legal research program? You know, taught perhaps in the second or third year, perhaps?
We have had advanced legal research.
Yeah. Have you been involved in that?
I did. I was for a while, and then I kind of went off separately in doing based on what the curriculum committee was requiring. I taught a federal tax research class, and I taught an international legal research class. And they were kind of expansions upon what had been taught in the advanced legal research class. The advanced legal research class that we've had here over the past few years has been focusing mostly on legislative history and administrative law. So, but those two, the federal tax research class, the international legal research class, are two classes that appear to have been, you know, of interest and kind of popular with some of the students.
Sounds very interesting. Now, in addition to your teaching, you also have written. You have some scholarship under your belt, so to speak, including one piece a few years ago that was cited by the American Library Association's Instruction Roundtable as one of the top articles in the field that year. You want to talk a bit about your publications and scholarship?
Sure. You know, I didn't really think about really pursuing a scholarship when I first came into the library.
Well, after all, you had your day job with being a librarian.
Yeah. But to be honest with you, most of the writing I've done has come out of my work. It's been based on things that I've observed, either while teaching or working with my fellow staff members, or you know, just other experiences I've had. And you know, I don't know that there's a real heavy requirement here that we teach, or excuse me, that we research and write, but I've come to really feel that it was very important. And the reason I did, I wrote an article a few years back about professionalism. And it was one of those things that was kind of gnawing at the back of my mind. I was trying to figure out what is a professional, and you know, what is a profession, and started doing some research on that because I had taken a class here as a first year on professionalism, and really came to, you know, a lot of the characteristics just, I mean, they kind of made sense, but they seemed to be also applicable to activities that others would not consider to be professions. And I kind of came to the conclusion that I figured that kind of vision was what made a professional. And getting out on the cutting edge and kind of trying to, you know, see what was going on, what are the issues, and you know, what was coming up, and getting getting out there. And one of the best ways to do that was through research and writing. And those things would come up in the course of my teaching, and like I said, with my interaction with other faculty members. And so, I think, to be honest with you, if you're going to be professional, you ought to research and write. I'm not advocating, kind of the heavy-duty research and writing that a lot of people, especially in the legal profession, the academic legal profession, do. But nevertheless, trying to, if you're going to be a professional, you need to be out there on the cutting edge and trying to figure out what are the issues and what is the discussion going on. And then if you write things, of course, you put your own reputation on the line.
That's right, but you make your own reputation, as you have, for somebody who is respected and known to know what it is he's talking about when he writes.
But and again, there's a lot that comes from that kind of that interaction with people, whether they like what you write or not. You still get the feedback, and it makes you think very critically about what you're thinking about, what you're researching. Are the concepts that you're kind of advocating really valid? Is there support for them, or is it is it intuitive, or is there empirical evidence support that? And so, and that just makes, to me, that makes you think that much more clearly and more exactly. So.
It's interesting. On my road trip the last few days, I was listening on Sirius XM radio to public radio feed of sorts that they have on that. And there was a fellow talking about how the availability now to basically publish or say things publicly through blogs and other devices on the internet, even email. People have learned to think much more clearly as they write, if they're going to have an audience, than if they just were, basically thinking on their own in the old days, supposedly. And it's honed one's ability to work with information and acquire more and then articulate it. And he thought this was all a very good thing. You didn't have to all work for the Washington Post or the New York Times or some journal like that to get out to audiences. That people are now able to do it sort of on their own through various internet-connected means. That it's actually helped foster knowledge. He also, in another part of his show, suggested that just as the Gutenberg Bible changed realities for scholars of that era, up until then, a scholar would basically read all the books available to him, and then he would memorize enough of it, or know enough of it, so he was the expert. Well, as hundreds and hundreds and eventually thousands and thousands of books started showing up, now that they could be printed in mass by that printing press process, nobody could do that anymore. And so we had to invent another way of retaining all that instead of in the heads of the experts. And that was when we invented libraries and eventually librarians to control libraries and keep them so they were workable. And, he said with the internet now, there are going to be evolutions in all of these fields, and it'll be interesting to watch. But it sounds like you're kind of out in front of it. I mean, this desire to articulate what you've learned in your work, in other words, is what you've done.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that's been my intent. I didn't really write just to write. I did write to hopefully make a difference.
You get feedback too when you write something.
Oh, yes.
Good or bad, but it helps you hone your thinking, I'm sure.
And that's the important thing, I think, because like I said, if it comes out of my teaching, the purpose of that is actually to improve my teaching.
That was sort of this fellow's theme behind people now going on public on the internet through various means, and the feedback they get helped them to improve their own processing and their own knowledge base. It was an interesting piece. It's what you do when you're driving for a few hours across country, I guess, besides looking at the scenery and making sure the car doesn't go in the ditch or whatever, or over a cliff. I came through some interesting places where that was the problem, not the ditch. Well, you have established yourself for your scholarship and so on, but you've also been active professionally in various association work, ELL, special interest sections, foreign comparative and international, SIS, others. You want to talk a little bit about that and perhaps why you thought that was important as well for you?
Yeah, that actually probably came by chance as well. But I was very fortuitous for me. I'd taken an interest in foreign and international law, started attending some of the programs at ALL, and started getting involved a little bit by chance. I don't know if you remember Maria Smolkaday.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she actually asked me to serve as a co-chair of the education committee one year, and she thought that if I would do that for a few years, that I would help. What would happen is that the incoming vice chair, well, the vice chair-elect would be a co-chair of the education committee, and then I would be the other co-chair. I'd be kind of institutional memory, and she anticipated that I would be there for a few years and help the new vice chair-elect each year for a few years as they work through the educational process there, and that was about 15 years ago, and I'm still doing that. So, and I enjoy it.
So a few years became a little longer than just a few years.
Yeah.
Well,
but I've always enjoyed that because that was, to me, AL does a lot of things, a lot of important things, advocacy, and it's a place where you can get to know each other and things like that. But to me, one of the most important things that ALL provides is that forum for those educational programs. And so I've held a lot of other positions, and I've appreciated that opportunity. And like I was the SIL chair, and then the SIS council chair, and a few things like that. I was also president of Westpac. As the president of Westpac, it was a really interesting experience. But I enjoyed the previous year when I was the
vice president.
Vice president-elect, because I was in charge of educational programming there as well.
That's right.
And so I've always been involved in that, and I've just felt that that was something that was really important, and I've really enjoyed that because that's something I think really serves every single member of the association.
Well, it certainly is an important part of our operation now. And, a lot of resources go into that program for good reason. Be it the annual meeting or now all these various webinars, I think they call them, yes, and such. So it's expanded even beyond the traditional kinds of programs. It's interesting, when I came into the association, which was probably a tad bit sooner than you, it was still, just a few hundred people would go to the annual meeting. There would be one program, perhaps in the morning, another one in the afternoon. On Tuesdays, that was a light day. We actually went out of the hotel for some sort of a quasi-social event, maybe see local sites or whatever, and but basically an opportunity to network and get to know your colleagues. But as the association grew and the need for more of this, this is where the emphasis has changed. One year I had the privilege of being in charge of the education program for an annual meeting. And we put on at the time, had been the most programs that had ever had up until then. And of course the big criticism was, I can't go to everything. Well, we have them recorded too, so you could get them that way, I guess. It might not be quite as perfect, but you have to be selective. But I think I'd rather have had that criticism than, well, there isn't anything to go to. Although maybe some people felt that as well, who knows. Well, that's the way it is. So you've done quite a bit. Now I noticed that you have been recognized by the Foreign and Comparative International SIS with the Daniel L. Wade Outstanding Service Award, and the Spirit of the SIS Award, which are two of their more prestigious awards, or most prestigious awards, as I understand it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I think from what you've been saying today and from what I'd already heard, well deserved.
Oh,
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Mhm. Well, Dennis, we're probably nearing the end of today's conversation. We've talked about a lot of things, and I think there'll be interesting additions to our repertoire of history. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention before we conclude?
No, I can't think of anything other than, I've been fortunate in my profession. I kind of had a lot of twists and turns over the course of my profession, but I've enjoyed most of what I've been able to do.
Well, I think you've been fortunate in another respect. You've been at a place that appreciated you and offered you the opportunities
Yes.
to reach out beyond just the role of whatever momentary role you have in the law library at the time, be it sit at the reference counter and help people or do other things, but like develop an international and comparative and foreign collection. But so you've been able to do more than just that, and that's, I would guess, a very satisfactory kind of career to have.
It has been.
Well, maybe on that basis, I should thank you for being today, talking with us, Dennis Sears, and for giving us all this information about yourself and our profession. And in thanking you, I'm thanking you on my behalf, of course, but also on behalf of our colleagues, Michelle Wu and Frank Hodak and Dick Spinelli, with whom I'm working to put together this oral history for the Hein online database. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.